All right, so this part's going to look at how we can help students develop the ability to transfer. So one of the biggest things that is suggested is to provide connections as much as possible. So can we connect the information to other disciplines, other ideas, everyday life? And also we need to consider the individual social and cultural aspects that are connected to the learner. So the design needs to be relevant and consequential to the learner themselves. So pretty straightforward ideas, but easy to implement. And the next point is just trying to find as many ways as possible to link what is being taught in class to an authentic application. So if a student's learning something like apprenticeship math and you're studying a financial unit, can you link that to real life? So for budgeting or for looking at credit card debt, that sort of thing. So with providing as many connections as possible, you're taking, if you look up at the top here, you could think of that as isolated learning. So you've got all these little bits and pieces. They're not connected. You can't really see the bigger picture. But if we draw in as many connections as possible, we're going to help enable our students to see that bigger picture. Through providing connections, we're going to see that motivation's increased as well as learning transfer. One really easy way to incorporate connections into the classroom is through the use of something like a mind map. So related to connections, we looked at some literature that talked about framing context expansively. So again, that's just the idea of removing the bounds of the classroom and trying to connect it as much as possible across time, place, to different people, and thinking of learners as actively contributing to that knowledge building process. Transfer was found to be increased if students felt that what they're learning was important and likely to be useful down the road. The same literature also suggested the importance of encouraging learners to draw on their previous knowledge. So one sort of caveat with that is to check for misconceptions in that knowledge and ensure that it does have some focus towards the learning activity. They also mention this idea of students being accountable. So they need to learn and understand their role is to generate their own solutions to new problems and adapt existing knowledge. So another thing you can try to use with students is this idea of an invention activity. So that's just really simple. It's time to try something out first before teacher-led instruction. So it could be something like trying to find a general formula for calculating an average. So the process is quite simple. There's some time to invent at the start, so they may or may not be successful. That's not really important. Then there would be the teacher-led instruction, and then some time to practice what they've figured out and apply the methods to different problems. So these invention activities have shown improved transfer. And you might ask, well, why is that? What's happening? Greater increase in agency. Students are learning from the failures. So by going through the process of invention, they're learning more about the components of the problem and how they interact. So they're getting a deeper understanding. And it's also been found to be quite a motivating type of activity. So another thing that's important to consider is this idea of providing as many examples of concepts in various contexts as possible. So a couple different ways that can be done is to have learners solve a specific case and then use additional similar cases to help abstract the principles. Or it's kind of the reverse idea. You can have the instructor generalize a case so learners can apply that to a whole class of related problems. Another way we can help students learn to transfer is through the use of analogy. So the benefits of analogy is that it helps students recognize the higher order relationships that exist between two domains. It helps them draw on prior knowledge, so something that they understood really well, and then link that to the new information. So it's helping them give meaning to that new information. There's a really great example of this. If you Google Fortress and tumor problem, there's a problem that was given to a bunch of med students during a research study, and it's a really interesting example of how this works. There's not much time to talk about it here, but I definitely suggest checking it out. What they found, though, in that research is that people really needed kind of a hint or a bridge to make the connections. So if we link that to science education at the secondary level, we can see the use of analogy with learning something like cell science. So you want to start with an anchor situation, so something that they know really well. In this case, we're looking at a city, so they can understand the parts of the city. And then they're going to try to apply that to the target situation, which is the cell and all the organelles within the cell. So sometimes, like I said, they're going to need a bit of bridging to make those connections. One thing that's pretty intuitive that the research pointed out was that rather than just presenting this analogy, you need to take the students through a process of making those connections. The last thing I'm going to talk about is the idea that, learning to transfer is kind of a process in itself. So what types of info, rules, strategies, metacognition, self-regulation, domain-specific problem-solving techniques are relevant across different learning situations. It's going to take a little bit of time for students to start recognizing that and learning to identify when information might actually be useful again. So overall, it's just going to take a little bit of practice to improve transfer.